Good evening and welcome. I appreciate you all joining me, and I would appreciate it more if those of you are willing and have clothes on to make yourselves shown to me. I'd love to see all the faces. Uh, I'd like to start with a short prayer and then tell some stories. I'm Asangan Binstock, and yes, I have a few stories to tell. Some are smiles, some have a few tears, but this was a great exercise for me alone, just to go back through my life and look at my wonderful, incredible, and intimate times with Sri Swami Satchidananda. Also, too, before we begin, I want to thank the program people for this whole notion that takes our guru out of the chair in satsang, speaking and answering questions, and puts him into our lives, as he so much was over the years, and to share a little bit of that about you. I'm going to start with that moment, the moment that Swami Satchidananda became my teacher. That was in Boulder. Boulder, Colorado was a moment in time where I had lived a rich and a wild life in the late 60s and arrived at my retirement. My retirement, I felt I had done enough avoiding the draft and finishing college, and I retired. I had a girlfriend, a dog, a wood stove, a bag of brown rice, a bag of pot, and some carving tools and a flute. And I was in a cabin in the mountains in Colorado, outside of Boulder. I came into town one day and saw a poster with Swamiji's face on it. Forgive me, we called him Swamiji through, I would say, our time in Connecticut. I saw that poster, and already the deep spiritual person that I was, I went to see the talk with the motivation of seeing old friends from New York. And I went and saw him, and something was very different than my life before that moment, because I was totally open and totally blown away by his presence. I sat in the auditorium and was transfixed by him. And I think from that moment on, I became a student of yoga and maybe gave up being the hippie I thought I was. I want to just give a little bit of background, though, because I had seen Swamiji in New York. I had seen him speak at the Universalist Church. I had seen a number of moments with him about, and I had taken classes at West End Avenue. None of that stuck. All of that was part of this great carnival of the 60s. It was part of everything that Electric Circus, and on and on. It was all that, and it didn't stick. I appreciated who he was, with one footnote. There was a moment in time that it popped up the other day when I thought about it, is I was there and right next to him for the dedication of the Electric Lotus. For those who don't know, the IYI in New York, the first and only center at the time, started its cottage industry to make money. Their version of a business was the Electric Lotus, which to the untrained eye looked like a head shop. I mean, except there was no drug paraphernalia. It was filled with posters, a lot of Peter Max posters and sneakers and paraphernalia, beads and flowers and bells and icons and so many mortis and all of the things that all of these devotees brought back from India and were creating this space. And it was filled with crafts too. I'll admit I tried making a living selling necklaces, beads made out of toilet paper mache. Didn't quite take, but it was fun. So it seems odd, but it was in a world where down the street was the psychedelicatessen, and here was the Electric Lotus. And I was in with the crowds. It was thick with people, and the incense hung low from the ceiling, and the bells and the sitars and the tablas. It was just one of those great moments. And there outside, the car pulls up. Peter Max opens the car, admits Swamiji in. He comes and sits down. There's silence. And now, this was an interesting moment. I was still far from committed to him, but I was up for anything. And he looked around and said, I don't know what all of this is. I don't know what it has to do with my teachings. And the room was silent. You could have heard a finger cymbal drop. It was just silent because it was kind of embarrassing. This was the grand opening, and he was saying basically, you missed the mark. Something's not here. And then he added, but if you children want to do this, fine. You have my blessing. And that apparently was good enough for the low bar at the time. Everyone went, fine, great. And they were back to cymbals and surat and tambora and everything and music, and that was it. And that, I only talk about that because it left a little bookmark in my brain. I said, this is a remarkable person. This is a remarkable man. I won't forget that. And that led me to what I then later experienced in Boulder, and I became the devotee. And I have to say, once in Boulder, the world changed for me. I took classes, I became a teacher, and I'll just say as a preface, Boulder itself was a crossroads. It wasn't the Bay Area, it wasn't New York. All the teachers passed through it. Everybody was in Boulder, came through Boulder. And at the same time, Gurudev didn't. He was there maybe twice a year. He gave a talk. He'll come back. He might do a program, but we were left to ourselves and to making phone calls furtively to New York or to Vijay in San Francisco. Had no idea what was going on. My teacher, Narayana, later left and became Erzl Tenzing and went with Rinpoche. Many of the founding pioneers I went to Hunter College with, and frankly, we all took LSD together. We were acid heads, and they went on to their spiritual experience, and I think I stayed on the clown bus a lot longer. I was younger, immature. Now that I'm so much more mature, I can tell this story. So in Boulder, in the IYI, things happened fast. Probably within 6 months of taking classes, I was trained and I was a teacher. I was teaching Hatha Yoga. And probably within 6 months of that, almost everyone had left. I didn't become director because of my great knowledge. Tatwan, then Arugan, and I were all that was left at the Boulder IYI. Everyone else followed Rinpoche, Guru Maharaji, the 14-year-old guru, or he was 12 then, I don't know. On and on. There was a wealth of teachers who came through. Everyone went their separate ways, and we were all so young and impressionable. So Tatwan and I taught classes. Soon, there were other teachers who were on the outside would come in, and I would say within 6 months of teaching, I was training teachers. This is a wild world then. I mean, this was the Wild West. We were it. We had it all. I would say I broke down Boulder. There's so many of these little tidbits. So I broke down Boulder into just a few things by location. What happened was there was the airport event. There was the program. And there was time with them. Because that back then, the airport was the event. everybody went to the airport, and we went right up to the gate. This is all pre 9/11, and we were there, in our whites, in our beads, with our flowers, with our garlands, with our bags full of whatever candy or candies we would give to Gurudev when he came, and he would arrive, and this was it. The family got to be right there when he first landed in Colorado. And interestingly, we knew nothing but to, basically pranam. And there was one fellow there from New York who dove at his feet and grabbed his feet as soon as he stepped out the gate, and he almost went face first over the top of him. And I thought, well, okay, there are other clowns on the bus. I mean, remember too, we were a mix of fresh off the commune, along with very serious academics who had studied philosophy, Eastern religion. So it was quite the mix, and we loved it. And Swamiji looked around, and he gave everyone blessings. At one moment, and I'm mixing a number of visits, he had given us all names by mail. He mailed our names to us. He visited, one visit he was there, and somewhere a few weeks later, we got a letter that got pinned up, and we found what our names were. We had got initiated and by him, and we got names from him, and he came and he spoke to each of us by name there at the airport. At one moment, I had my little baby Atman, who was tiny enough to just be cradled in my arm, and Swamiji took him and held him, and he was adorable. I'm the father. I'm not too biased, but he was utterly adorable. And Atman kind of put his fingers up into Swamiji's beard, and Swamiji's talking to all of us, and he jerked his head. And, it was like a little embarrassing, but hey, he was a baby. So Swamiji took all his fingers, got them out of his beard, and managed the one hair that Atman dislodged. He went like this in slow motion and dropped it near me. And I got it and wrapped it around my finger and put my hand in my pocket until I could get a tissue. Later, my finger had turned purple, almost black, because I wasn't smart enough to wrap loosely, but I still have that hair in a little silver box on our altar. That was a great, great moment in time. I want to just jump further, and with a little bias to Atman, but it was really about Gurudev. Later, another moment in time, he was old enough to sit on my shoulders at the airport. And his mother, my first wife, Amba, was a Orthodox La Leche League member. And to mothers who've gone through this, there was nothing that would pass his lips except mother's milk until, I don't know, they were pretty wild. I thought until maybe he was 14. But basically, at one, all he had ever had was mother's milk. He's on my shoulders. Again, the little cherub in the Oshkosh overalls and his carrot red hair. Swamiji's coming off the plane and saying hello and greeting us. And people are giving him garlands, and they gave him a big bag of chocolate kisses, little foil wrapped kisses. And he's tossing them to people and giving them to everyone. And it was wonderful, wonderful moment. I'm sticking right now with the wonderful moments. He then, in what seemed like slow motion, came up to me with an Atman and peeled open a kiss. And next to me, peripheral vision, I'm seeing Amba, his mother, smiling and beaming. The Guru's with our child. And what he did was he peeled off the kiss, broke the tip of the chocolate kiss off, and slowly raised it up to Atman. And you saw Amba's face go from beam to total panic. What's happening here? And he slowly took the kiss, the tip, put it over my head into Atman's waiting mouth, and it sat on his tongue. And Atman sat there like this, with this melting. He closed his mouth, and we watched him, and he just started beaming. That's his first food. The guru gave him his first food, and it was a chocolate kiss. And all but one in that whole airport scene loved that moment. It was truly a great moment. And this was the guru. He was our family. We had him, even if it was just for the weekend. It was wonderful. We were also, in prepping for him, we had no real concept of what really had to happen, except we had to do our best. That meant for me putting fresh duct tape in the Volvo over the cracked seat covers, maybe a new Mexican blanket. We thought, hey, let's sacrifice as we can over things, seats and such, and off to the airport. Now, I had one opportunity I spent a lot of time alone with him because it was felt he should be alone. He had a long flight. He was in the car with me, with the secretary sitting behind me. And it's an hour trip, more or less, from Denver back to Boulder. And here I am with him. And at first I was so excited. And then I realized I was full of fear. I had no idea how to behave. Now, as some have suggested, I can be chatty. I can talk a bit. I was silent. I thought, this is his time. Who am I to say, would you like to listen to the radio, or can I offer you we have some drinks or anything? I was silent. We drove back to the Institute, back to Boulder, and he then started asking me questions about the Institute. How are things? How is everything going? How are the classes? Are you teaching? How many classes are there? How many students? How many teachers? Just the nuts and bolts of his institute. We were caretakers. And that was quite wonderful. He made it a little easier for me. And he filled in and did that. And one time he did something, and it was, I think the first time I caught his wry smile, is we needed heat. This was like a Boulder winter. It had to be 25 degrees. He turned on the heat, and then he looked at me and smiled as he turned on the air conditioning as well. And later, I was way too embarrassed to even say, why are you doing that? That'd be a simple thing. I was just driving. And later I realized, of course, to take the humidity out of the air, he had that going on. He knew it. He has that engineering background that I did not have at the time. I'll leave that little bit of the travel alone with taking him back to the airport once. We were running late. It had snowed the day before. So it wasn't just the idyllic snow we see on the postcards and in movies of Colorado. It was the brown slush being splashed up from cars in front of us as we're going. And he said, wipers. And I put on the wipers. Spray. And I took out our sprayer, which was a spray bottle, which you would spray outside and spray the windshield. And I got probably the first of one of those searing looks that would take a little burn cream later. And he says, give it to me. And he rolled up his sleeve and put his arm out. There had to be a wind chill of like 15 degrees outside. And he's spraying, goes, wiper, wiper. And we managed to limp to Denver, and we got there. And yes, I'm sure he remembered me well later down the road, but that was our airport time. Programs were another story altogether, because Tatuan and I, we winged it. We had no idea what to do. We got mics set up. We did sound checks. We had a chair for him. We had water there. We did essentially okay, but there were moments. One moment was that when I took his shoes off and he went up and sat down. This was at Colorado University. I'm told the Metros may have been there for that. This was about 72, maybe 73. And he says to me, hey, Sangan, come up, introduce me. I was totally caught off guard. Introduce you? How am I going to introduce? I panicked. I know how to have a smile that maybe hides panic, but I was in sheer panic. What do I do? So I walked up with him on stage. I waited till he got seated. And I took the mic and looked around and did my best to cloak what I didn't know and said, thank you all for coming. I thought I could fill time with being gracious. Thank you for coming. It's great that we can all be here together. And I'd like to introduce my teacher, Sri Swami Satchidananda. And then I turned and pranamed and walked off. And he took his mic and he said, well, let me add a little bit. And he did his own introduction because I kind of dropped the ball. It's amazing that he kept giving me the ball because I dropped it. There was nothing there. I had nothing. In fact, to add insult, to injury, Tatwan and I decided this is crazy everywhere we go. And there were little places and colleges and centers where he would speak to lug that big chair around. So we made him a chair. It was 2 pieces of plywood on a piano with a piano hinge so it could collapse, and then legs. And our legs were screw-in legs that you would put on a coffee table. And in hindsight, that was ridiculous. But we did that. Now, to compound ignorance, we said, we can't sit in it to try it out. That's the guru's chair. We will just get the cushions made and take care of it. So here we had a good-looking chair that really didn't, in the end, look like it could support a bowl of fruit. Gurudev came out to give the talk. He thanked us and turned and thanked the audience and sat down after he looked at it. And I think that was my second burn scar on the forehead, and he sat on it. And maybe that was the first miracle I witnessed, a miracle of levitation. Because later, when I sat on it, a leg just sort of snapped out and it tore the plywood away. It was like ridiculously useless. And lessons were learned. And at least if they weren't learned, we didn't repeat that mistake. We had a wonderful time. But in kind, he had his fun too. When I went to pick him up once for a talk, I went and knocked on the door of the house, and he opened up the door. I thought Sheila, his secretary, would open. He opened up the door. He filled the doorway, and his hair was sticking out in all directions. Someone told me later he oiled his hair. I didn't know. All I know was I got it. I was in fright. It was just like, and he, of course, started laughing. He had a great time with it all. Coming home from that same talk, there was lots of snow everywhere. And I said goodnight, and I'm looking to get back in the car to go back to where I lived. And we had a house, we borrowed a house from him, and snowballs started zinging by me. And he's laughing and throwing snowballs. And I went, thank you. He goes, no, what's the fun? So I said, okay. I started picking up snowballs. Now, he's very good. I mean, he hit me in the head twice, and I'm barely missing them. And if I was missing them, I'm sure he meant to miss me. So I started throwing snowballs back at him, and he goes, no, I'm just an old man. And he runs into the house and closes the door. That was the end of the evening. It made up for the burn cream. No. Boulder was an incredible time. 2 other little moments in Boulder I want to share. That is that, well, first, by the way, those houses, he firmly reprimanded me. I seem to get a lot of those because the houses we didn't know what he needed. And we assumed, well, he's from India. He doesn't want furniture in his house. He wants an open floor with cushions. So we would borrow a devotee's house and move all the furniture to the basement. And he said he saw that, and what were you doing? What were you even thinking? And we said, well, we wanted to make it comfortable and to feel natural and at home. And he said, don't ever, ever, ever do that again. But he got it. There was a little bit of heart there. And remember, too, we weren't that far from the clown bus in the realm of things and time. two little serious notes. This was the beginning also of the yantra, the pendant. Tatwan figured out how we could save money for printing stationery. We would get a rubber stamp that had Integral Yoga Institute, Boulder address, etc. And we could use that same stamp on paper and on envelopes. It was a brilliant idea if you could get it straight and stamp it. I went to pick up the stamp at the place where they made them, and here's the rubber stamp, and here's these little lead plates with the opposite. The stamp had letters that was raised. Here are the plates with the letters incised. And I said, what's that about? What are those? Well, that's how we make a rubber stamp. We do that, we cut that with acid or however they cut it, and then they would push the warm rubber in and they'd have a stamp. So I said, so you can make those if I bring you other things and you can make them? And to jump ahead, that's where I got 4 plugs made. That was the yantra that I would cut and sand and polish. And then from there, you can make a rubber mold, and jewelers would know. And I learned how to inject wax into the mold, and we started casting silver yantras. Now, before that, I took one and brought it to him in the suburbs of Denver. And after his talk, I asked Shanti, could I just show him this? I didn't know to call ahead. I'm not that smart to make an appointment. I showed up, and the rain is pouring, and I'll never forget this. I think to pay for my insolence, she said, sure. So Swamiji opened the door. She went into his room, adjoining room, opened the door. I'm standing there in the rain, and he said, what? And I showed him the yantra, and he looked at it, and he was just taking a look at all sides, what it was, asked me what I was going to do with it. All the time, I'm just standing in the rain. He didn't invite me in. That was a price for next time. You kids out there, remember, make appointments. So that was the beginning of pendants, and we cast them for a while, and that went on its way. The other thing I want to talk about before I leave Boulder is the big lie. I call it the big lie. And Krishna and Narayana were both IYI students who later went on to become Rinpoche students. Narayana, as many of us know, became the regent for Rinpoche, and they suggested to me, we went to Hunter College together, and as I said, they were part of the pre-yoga era of carnival and drugs and all that came with it. And so Krishna came to me and said, why don't we have them meet? We saw that Swamiji's coming to Boulder. Rinpoche is here in residence now. They've never met. And there's been so much movement between the organization in terms of devotees. Wouldn't it be a great idea? I thought it was brilliant. Let's do it. Why not? I would arrange for Swamiji's schedule for the weekend that he would come in. So basically, he would fly in during the day of the program or the night before and would settle in. We would make sure meals were there. If there was a gathering with the family, the IYI family, he would do that. There'd be a program in the evening, and the next day, if it was, if he would do it, there'd be an initiation and then off to the airport and Sunday, and he was gone. And I slipped in this one event with Rinpoche, and driving to Boulder from the airport, he would ask me, as he had before, what is the program? What is the schedule? And I told him that. And when I got to the Rinpoche meeting, he said, And he went silent for a minute and asked me, did Rinpoche ask for this meeting? And I had already been fully invested in it. I thought this was an important thing that had to happen. And I took my Bronx mind down the avenues of justification. Well, his students relayed, asked, told, and my answer was very simply, yes, Swamiji. Rinpoche asked for it. And something happened. My whole body changed. It was like this. I don't know if my pressure was up, my skin was flushed. It didn't matter. I should never play poker, certainly. But I said yes, and he went, okay. And we moved on. Comes the evening of the talk, about 2 hours before that was the Rinpoche event. And he showed up at the house where Swamiji was staying with Krishna and Narayana. I think Sheila was the secretary at the time. She sat them down. There was introductions, and Sheila started serving everyone tea. And I was feeling very guilty because I couldn't shake the fact that I kind of manufactured the answer out of air. And I got up, and I had things to do. I needed to certainly get the auditorium ready and do a sound check with Tattwa and all of that, but I didn't have to leave. And Swamiji said, you should stay, have some tea. And I said, well, Swamiji, I can't. I have to go do work. I couldn't stay there. I told him, I forgot what I even said. But basically I said I had to go. And then he gave me what might have been his first direct teaching to me. He said, Asangan, you should take it easy. And great yogi that I was, I turned as I'm going out the door and said, Swamiji, I have so much to do. I'll take it easy later. Thank you. And I left. And that one I always wore. I still can think about that moment of where I said that rather than just say, no, it was an idea from his students. I don't know. I just was so attached to that result that I kind of pushed that. Later, Krishna and Narayana caught up with me after the weekend was over and said, that went really well. And I told them what I just told you folks, that I really didn't tell the truth. Swamiji asked, and I said, I sort of invented Rinpoche coming through you, and said, yeah, he said it. And they laughed and looked at each other and said, the same thing happened with us. Rinpoche asked the same question, and we sort of squeezed an untruth out of our answer, and we thought it was important to get together. In any case, that went smoothly. It didn't come up again. Okay, I want to jump to Connecticut. Connecticut was a different world than Boulder. Amba and I, we got married sort of as a result of what we believed Swamiji told us. We cared for each other, and we were living in the Institute, and he said, you can't live in my house unless you're married. You're welcome to move outside, but we both felt we needed to be there, and we felt he was telling us we should get married. So we got married. We did. And we were very happy together initially, and we had a beautiful child. We have a beautiful child. And the marriage was having a rough time, and I asked Swamiji, could we give up the IYI, let someone else do it, and move to Connecticut where we could get some clarity and support and be at the ashram? And he said yes. And we did that, and we moved to Pomfret, and after a while, we were able to both move into the Institute. At that point, we did get clarity. We separated and eventually got divorced. Atman had the best of a rough life in that we both lived there. He had both of us, and Swamiji. He's one of the cherubs in so many of those little group pictures that pop up with Swamiji and the preschool. Now, the preschool teacher Atman had, funny thing, was Karuna, the woman who I since came to fall in love with, marry, and here we are 42 years later. That one stuck a little better. That may show up in my book, Starter Marriages, Do's and Don'ts. But here we are today to smile at it all. So we went to Connecticut. We moved into the ashram. I became part of the maintenance crew, and after a while ran the maintenance group. And again, it wasn't because I was good or bright. It's the turnover was such that if you stayed still anywhere in any position, you all of a sudden found you were running it. And that was, I think, the case all over the country. We were still so young. We did what we could with what we had. So Connecticut had a whole different feeling because now we were in a frontier town, and here's Swamiji riding on horse back, visiting, seeing us while we were doing evening karma yoga in the garden, playing volleyball with us, playing with his electric. He had remote helicopters. People gave him all these things, and it was always an event. We were with him a lot, and it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. But the flip side of that was that he also, well, first, let me say this. We went once as a group. Every once in a while, the group would gather and do something together with him. We went to a movie in Danielson, which is 20 minutes away. The whole ashram got up, went to the movie with Swamiji. We got there late. The owner was outside the theater with his baby and his wife and was so proud that we were there. He had stopped the beginning of the movie until we got there. And this was just so wonderful. We all filed into the theater and we were all excited. And there we were. I was sitting behind Swamiji, so I saw what followed. Somebody gave him this big box of chocolates. And we think, hey, I'm fine with the guru, the movie, and sweets. Why not? And he turned and lashed at him. I'm not here for that. And everybody, okay, sat real still. All right, maybe it's not that kind of an event. Maybe there's a teachable moment here. Whatever it was, we froze. He took his chocolates back and sat feeling a little less than wonderful at the moment. And we sat there and the movie began and Swamiji turned, and I think it was Prem. I may get the secretary's Prem. And Prem had shopping bags full of Indian sweets. So he was just messing with us, I guess. And we were sitting there for the whole movie, passing along, eating. We looked like squirrels before winter. Our cheeks were full of chocolate. It was all over the place, butter from the popcorn. It was a wild and wonderful evening. We were with our Papa, and we felt like he was our father in so many ways. To me, he was a father as well because I had some very low moments in Connecticut due to who and what I was and things I was doing. And he sort of took me under his wing a bit. I'm sure not just me, but this is my story. One night, I was leaving, a Saturday night, I was leaving Ananda Kutir with my carpenter's toolbox, big heavy box, and I had just finished and coated this deer pen. There was all of these gifts we gave him. There was a deer, this mule deer that was a gift from the 9 couples he had just married. We were one of the couples. This was early on because this was to Amba. He did a group meditation. We never had a wedding with him, and we did it. And I was smelling of creosote and bits of what were essentially tar on my body. And he was driving up to give satsang. It's Saturday night. And you could just smell the cloud of sandalwood and the car, and he was pristine. And he pulled up next to me. He looked at me and went, get in. Don't touch anything. And I sat like this in the car in the back seat, and he drove up, wound up to Shivananda Hall. There's a crowd of people. There was a big retreat program and a big crowd, and he opens the door, and everything seemed with him in slow motion. He was just so elegant. He got out of the car, and then this tar-encrusted baby opens the back door and gets out too and tried to just slip away. It was something, truly something. Where am I? I'm here. And he would, he did something I don't know if the other people spoke of, where he came out one night in satsang, and when he was in residence, when he wasn't traveling the world, he would come out and we'd have satsang every Saturday night. Now that was great and wonderful. And one night he came out, and those of you who have blonde hair, as I do, may remember this. He stumbled as he reached for his chair, and there was like an audible silence, a hush. And is he okay? And then it all got compounded from there. He turned and slurred, "No, I'm fine. I'm okay." And I go, "What is that? Did he have a stroke? Is there something wrong?" And he did this routine, we'll call it. Was it a routine? We didn't know. He was drunk. He acted drunk. He looked drunk. He sounded drunk. And with whatever he said to apologize or smooth it over, it got worse. Any idea that he was playing with us was evaporated. There wasn't a soul in that room that didn't believe after 3 or 4 minutes of him stumbling and grabbing the microphone and sitting that he was drunk. And in truth, I don't remember the point of it, but he did say something about watching and trusting your mind afterwards. He says, "Oh, you thought I was a spirit of a different kind." And he sat right up and went about a satsang, and we all looked at that and went, "What happened there?" He did it a second time, and we all went, "Aha." The new people, of course, were concerned, and no, don't worry, it's just he's doing this. He did it again. Maybe he took longer, but after a while we go, no, this time he is it. I don't know what happened, the stress of the road, whatever. We believed our guru was drunk. And again, he laughed at us all, and that was the end of it. But remember, the clown bus. We all went to Music Mountain. Carole King had given us her property, which later was sold to buy Virginia, but buy the ashram property here in Virginia. But the whole ashram went there with Gurudev to see it. Let's go. Hey, we loved the field trip. You know, it was like a posse. You're out of the office. You're on the range. You're with your buddies. We were there. And Tyagananda, at the time, Tyagan was still a monk, and Chidananda and I just sort of roamed around back, and downstairs of this big, big house was the rec room. It was a little darker, there were windows there, and there was a bar, a wet bar, the kind that might show up in a B Western. So we're looking around and nothing much going on. Tyagananda goes around behind the bar and he starts miming, cleaning glasses. And he's just sort of moving things around, and I kind of leaned up against the bar and go, "What do you say, Mikey? Just one more." And Chidananda starts acting the part too, and we're slurring our words and just sort of playing guru, I suppose. And we're going, it doesn't get any better. And Swamiji walks by. He walks by outside with some people who were invited special guests. And there are his devotees, 2 in orange, 1 in white, going, this was something. We froze, and I would say we stopped that scene right there. It ended. It was over. We were done playing drunk. Never again. Nothing more was mentioned. Again, another burn mark. People wonder where these little brown spots are, but I got the look, and I can't say I got used to the look. It was a powerful look. So in Connecticut, there was something also divine, a bit of the divine. Tyagan had a property that had a lake and a waterfall, and we worked very hard. We'd have karma yoga sometimes 2-3 times a week at night after our regular work, because it was about service. We were all there. We were all so excited to be there, and we did what was needed to make there happen. It was a rough there in the winter with blankets on our shoulders. We saw our breath through the winter. It was a cold winter. Those are other stories. They're not with Swamiji, but in fact, I still believe that those who could went to India just to warm up, because it was brutal. It was a rough time. He served us at Tiagan's house food. He served us a meal. He wouldn't let us get up. He told us, sit there, and he went around. I felt like Christ and the disciples. This was in an age before words like gluten and lactose intolerance were even known. So the food that was universal to all yogis, pizza and ice cream. He served us. The beginning of what I'd call the bell curve of learning and knowledge was just bliss. And then what might have been the backside of it was, no, Gurudev, Swamiji, I've had enough. That's fine. Here, eat. You can't say no. We, at the end of that afternoon, had pizza and ice cream coming out of our ears. I didn't know I could eat that much and still get up and walk. This was his fun, because he laughed the whole time as well. Here, eat. It was great. Okay, here's where the moment while I was still president, I didn't stay president. I had, in prayer, asked him to let me go, and he did. I felt I wasn't worthy. But while president, whenever I spoke, whenever I saw him, he would rip into me. He would bust me. It was so very hard. And walking down the hill to the school, I asked a good friend, what do you do? And she said, well, when he asks me something and I don't have a good answer, I say, I don't know. And that seems to be okay. And I thought, that's brilliant. Why am I always so literate? We got to the bottom of the hill. There's students, there's parents, there's others, and there's Swamiji in front of his little white golf course. And he turned to me. And as he often did, he'd have a question. And all too often, I would be fried on the spot. And he said, well, something, I don't remember the question. I was at some point standing comatose. He asked me a question, and I said, well, there's a few ways we can go, but I don't know. I don't know that answer. And he went, And others said later, the second question was already a little angry. He asked me something, and again, I said, Swamiji, I really have to look into that. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know. Then, it looked like he rose up to 12 feet. He looked like a bull with steam coming out of all orifices, and he bellowed, so tell me, when I ask you, will my coffin be ready? When will my coffin be ready? Will you tell me then? I don't know. And this was the moment where parents are holding their children. Everything froze. I was that piece of something left on the grill, crisped and burnt. And Karuna jumps between us. Karuna jumps between us, looks up at Gurudev, because he was still over 10 feet tall in that moment, and says, Swamiji, when you ask him that, he will know. He will know. He looked at her and couldn't help but laugh. He looked at me and smiled. And he said, well, good, and got in his cart and drove off. Now, there's more to that story, which was the moment that I realized that this woman, who I always thought was incredibly attractive in his silver bathing suit and was a wonderful preschool teacher and was already a friend, I looked at this woman and said, this is the woman I'm going to be spending my life with. And it was wonderful. That was a very, very important moment for me. And I learned to be more careful with my answers. I'll leave the Connecticut activity with what was the beginning of Lotus. Up until that point, I was Gurudev's night man. I was the person who would be fixing his helicopter rotor, chipped paint on his bike. I forget what it is. There was this sort of mini temple of light some devotee brought from India, and it was really kind of poorly finished. It had dripping orange shellac. All of that stuff ended up on my table down in the basement to fix. Now, that was fine. I was happy. I understood karma yoga, and that's for a later talk also, but I understood it. It was simple. You had stuff to do, you do it. That's it. You don't question it, you just do it. And so I'm fixing things, but what was special about it and what connects it to the theme of the evening, Gurudev, the stories, is he would call. We had party lines, so you could pick up a phone, and we'll get right back to that in a second. And if you didn't notice it was lit up, oh, I'm sorry, and you'd hang up because it was a common line. But the phone would ring where you directed it to, and here it is, 11 o'clock at night. The phone would ring. It would only be him. I knew that, and I'd pick it up. And maybe here I'll just take a little aside. Something Paraman alluded to, and a few of us were fairly good at it at the time, was imitating Swamiji's voice. It wasn't, I'm not saying we're proud of it, but remember, in time, the clown bus was just a few years ago. There we are. And if the phone rang, and when I was president, my number, I was like one or two numbers off from Gurudev's, and somebody wanted to get me to find out if we were picking zucchini in the garden that night. I don't know what the question would be, and because I guess I felt the need for the bit of humor, I would answer, Hari Om, my child. I can't quite do it now as well, but I could. Others did it better. But it was enough to take someone who had a simple question for me and throw them into panic. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. Swamiji, I'm sorry. I'm pleased. And I would, of course, say, well, it's okay. And then say, it's me. It's Asangan. What do you need? And, I wouldn't say it's a way to be popular among your Gurubai, but we had fun. In any case, he would call at 11 o'clock at night, and I'd pick it up, and I'd get him. Hari Om, Asangan. I go, yes, Swamiji, it's me. And he would ask this, and maybe someone else can tell me what it really meant. He would say, where are you? And I'd look around, and as I said, every night, I'm in the basement. Now, is this a deeper question? Is there some yana question there that I should have seen a deeper meaning to? Or as I at the time thought, well, he could just feel where I was and dial a number, but not know where he was dialing. I don't know, but he would call every night, and he would ask what I was doing, if I was okay. Did I have any treats? He was on this, what we thought was residue of an Indian upbringing. He says, where is your wife? I said, well, Karna's in the house. Did she bake you any treats to be working at night? I said, no, Swamiji. And he laid into her all the time in public, why aren't you baking sweets? And I think she's the Italian word is for Calabrese, so Calabria, South Italy, is cabanadost, which means you're from Calabria, but it also means you have a thick head. I think she resisted that notion, and whereas she was a baker, I never saw a cookie on these late night things. So that was the prelude to Lotus. Gurudev spoke of nothing but Lotus. He said even, I can't think of anything else. I can only see this image of this shrine. At this point, there were no drawings. There was nothing that showed Lotus. He said, I just can see this place that has this lotus, that has these various altars to religions inside it, and a light that would shine on all of it. That would be a one light. And he even named Rudra's daughter, Padma, Lotus, when she was born. So that as a background, I was still president. I went with him and Shanti. Well, Shanti and he flew with Brahman Burman, an earlier pilot and devotee. We flew and we drove to a home in Boston for this big meal. There was some celebration. I managed to be invited and I was going. It was the meal where we had a big circle and I'm reaching for food and I'm eating and he grabs my arm. He says, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know if there was some spiritual question there. I said, "Well, I'm eating." "No, you don't eat with your left hand." And being again a great advanced yogi, I said, "But Swamiji, I'm a lefty." So he said, "No, you eat with your right hand, sit on your left hand." So there was this sumptuous feast, and I'm sitting with one hand under my butt, eating with my right hand. It was interesting, very interesting time. But the point of that was that on the way out to go home, Shanti said, "Swamiji, it's Asangan's birthday. I'll go back in the car. Let him fly with you." So Swamiji, Brahman Levy, and myself are in the airplane, and this is in the outskirts of Boston. And Swamiji tells Brahman where to fly, and we're flying now over Boston, and he's asking me about domes as we're flying over them. "What do you think of that?" I go, "Well, I like that. I like the clear ones, and I like the ones where the structure is that, and we're talking domes." I didn't know what he was talking about or why, but that was the beginning of, in the next few days, I was taken out of my duties and started making a model for him. And I made a series of models, and I made first paper petals and then later fiberglass petals. Some of those are in the storage somewhere here. And that was the beginning or a beginning. I watched him work, and I wouldn't be surprised to know that there were others elsewhere doing the same thing. I do know I was doing it, and those, at some point, my model collapsed. We were laughing later, and that I felt at my best, I was really just a tool in his hand. He would say, "Do it," I would do it. And he asked me, we were trying to make this cupola, and the thing kind of half caved in. I didn't hear from him again. He said, that was it. That was the end of it. He didn't ask me to do more. So I went back to my other job, and there was this model that I fixed, but it stopped at that point. And later, he had me meet him or join him with meetings with Jagadish, because at that point, I guess it went to an actual architect and went forward. Now, for me, this was just as we were getting married, and as in 79 and 80, I think the movement, everyone moved, and I had to do something which was involved with financial support of my son. At that point, everyone was a whole-time worker at the ashram. There was no money concerns, and I had to do this. Amba went off to graduate school, and I said, let me go to school. I'll do better as an architect than I will as I was a cabinet maker then, which sounds exotic, but there was no money. So that's what happened. And only years later did I look back and realize, well, the making of the model and doing all of this, and this one other thing I'll tell you in a second about the yantra and the meru, was very much the influence that sent me to architecture school. And I became an architect from that moment on. The yantra was something else. There was a backyard. I remember vividly, Swamiji and Shanti were sitting in beach chairs in the backyard of the ashram in Connecticut. It was a grand yard, and people basically left him alone to sit, and I couldn't resist. I said, "Swamiji, I did this drawing, I want to show you." And he went, "Sure, show me." Satchidananda had given me old triangles and a T-square. I'd never used them before. And I figured out that, well, if the yantra could be seen as a plan, what happened if you rotated it? What would it look like then? And I made these two wedding cakes, one of it with the petals coming up, and a second one with the petals going down. I had never seen a Meru, but I said, what do you think? Could we make something like that? And he and Shanti looked at each other and laughed. I wasn't in on the laugh. I didn't know what was funny. And he pointed to the Meru in 1978 that I had drawn that later became what we used on the tomb. That became the Meru. I used it in my portfolio to get into graduate school, to become an architect, and it was the beginning and a big part of my career and essentially who I was. I'll leave Connecticut with this last little coda. Swamiji and Mataji are standing next to the van. We were the last couple to leave. This is 1980. And we're loading his things in. We had room to bring his things down to the Arlington, the Washington IYI in Arlington at the time. And he was looking over it. And there was a moment, I didn't know that Mataji knew or not knew. She goes, "Oh, dear ones, you're not coming with us?" And we had just seen Kundun, or some Tibetan movie. So I touched her forehead with mine and said, "Oh, Mataji, we'll be right back." Years later, 35 years later, when we're breaking ground for our house, she said at lunchtime, "Dear ones, I understand you're building a house here." And I winked at Karuna and went over and put my forehead against hers and said, "I told you we'd be right back." I couldn't resist. But yes, that was our end to Connecticut. We left, we went to Maryland. I went to architecture school. I worked in various firms. I got work in NASA, and I mentioned NASA because I had previously in Connecticut taken him to the boat shop where I made cabinets. He loved the techniques, and we had a great time there. He asked all great questions. While working at NASA, as soon as I could, I went and found the people I had just done a project for in the public relations office and said, "Listen, I need to set up the VIP tour. I need the best of your guys to give a tour to a very special person." And I arranged a tour from this retired general who was in the Air Force, who had just retired from NASA. And we set up this tour. We went around and had the most incredible day. Swamiji's loving the sound tester, the vibration tanks. Where Goddard Space Flight Center is where there's no manned flight that comes out of it, but all of the satellites, most of the satellites get developed there, and a lot of the science as well. So it was very rich with technology. And then to boot, on top of that, there was a techno fair going on where vendors were trying to essentially sell things to NASA. So we went into this huge hall filled with vendors, and Swamiji had a wonderful time going around and looking at all of these things, asking questions, and it was rich. Now, that was fine and good, but to top that, afterwards we went, Prem, Swamiji, Karuna, and myself, the four of us went to Udupi Palace, which is a wonderful Indian restaurant. Now, we had all had Indian food with him. You've heard from others regale with stories of food. Food was an essential part of our love of this planet. And we took him to it. It was famous for having a page of dosas. They were all different, and they were all rich and wonderful. And we already knew what he was going to find, and we just gave him the menu and let him find it. And when the waitress came, he said, "Well, I'll have the Coimbatore dosa. You know, I'm from Coimbatore." And we all ordered different ones. And when they came, he looked, and what I kind of connected with, because I'm incredibly childlike, I got it. He could be too. And as soon as they were served, he looked at mine and said, that looks very good. And I said, well, Swamiji, and just as I said that, I saw Prem going, don't. I could give you a piece of mind. He goes, well, no, that's not right. In the Bronx, we called it sharesies. I can cut them both in half, and you can have a piece of each. And at this point, Prem went from red to kind of a plum color, and she was like, because it was all wrong. You don't do that. And we did it. I did it. I did my most clinical cut and serve, and we each had one of each. He goes, sharesies. He loved it. We had a great time. Wonderful time with him doing that. One night, we took him to the gallery. I had a solo show in Washington of my sculpture. I was an architect and had the time to evenings, weekends to make sculpture. I had a show. The gallery was, of course, was closed. This was, again, on my birthday. I called them and said, hey, it's my birthday, my special guest. They opened it up for us, and we took Swamiji there, and we had a little tour of the work. Ram Hershey was there also. Ram Hershey's a chiropractor who had a birthday the same day as mine. So we had shared various birthday events with Swamiji, the cracking of the nuts, the cracking of our heads. There's a photo about somewhere of that, and on and on. And here he was sitting in a small circle of a little satsang in Gallery 10 on Connecticut Avenue in DC, and it was wonderful. And Karuna said, well, let's all eat. We went to AV's. How many of you are coming? And there was maybe 15 or 18 people there. I said, oh, we're coming. She ordered enough pizza for all of us. When we got there, and this is now like 8, 9 o'clock at night, maybe half the people got to their cars and says, we just spent an hour, whatever they said, only half showed up. And Swamiji said, fine, we'll eat, let's eat. And again, he wouldn't let us leave till we ate all the pizza. That was a birthday I don't forget, again, with that. So be careful when someone says, sit and eat, and there's a lot of food. It was a wonderful time. I would say a few serious notes, actually. Because now I had a little bit of architecture training, when I would come down with Karuna weekends, and we went, and you add the years up, 35 years, we were hosted by our dear friends, the Barcells and others, and eventually at the very end we stayed in the Lotus Inn and on. But we were there as often as we could be there. That was our home. It always seemed like Washington was a temporary stop, and it's the worst job to try to get in a city with a graduate school full of architects is Charlottesville. So we were in Washington a little longer than we had planned, about 30 years longer. And we would come down. And in the time there, we got involved, and I got involved with the design of the campus, I would say, the square. They asked me to help them lay out parking for Shivananda Hall, and what came of it was Shivananda Hall got moved over, and where it was is the open green and the other buildings, and there's still a drawing somewhere of all the other buildings that can and may one day go, but I got involved, and it was wonderful. I got to be a real architect, I suppose, for and help the ashram. And I designed, as Swamiji said at the dedication of Chidambaram and of Guru Bhavan, we designed by facts. It was his designs, and I made them real. It's his design that Chidambaram has the split floor where you look up at the altar and down into the guha. That was all his, and it was all very wonderful, and that was a very powerful experience to design the tomb with the teacher who will be in the tomb. And I don't have the words to put around that, but I would just say that it was something that still stays with me as just that powerful. I'll say this before I have one last story to tell, which is It'll take about 10 minutes or so, and I call it the miracle, and it's kind of gives it away. Uh, I Tatwan and I worked for a senior home. This is how we made our money, and at night we taught. At this point, the institute was pared way back, and we were both chopping up cauliflower and vegetables in the kitchen. And I had among my jobs to load crates from the basement onto this freight platform. It was an elevator that had steel sidewalls and one of those U-shaped beams that would pull you up through to the floor above. And it was just essentially a square cut in the slab above that this shaft, basically, it was just two tracks and this platform. And the person who ran the kitchen would say, "This is how we do it," and she trained me. We throw the crates on, you hit the up button, and you hop on the crate on the platform and ride up. This is long before anybody said that's not so safe, not so smart. We did that, and I did that for months. One hot day, I was just whistling, and I loaded up everything, and I got on the cart, and I had my arm on the steel wall. The clearance between the steel wall coming up and the concrete beam was the width of the track, which is maybe an inch and a half, and my arm's hanging out. So this freight elevator catches my arm and starts pulling at it to essentially shear my arm. And I just pulled it tight and screamed, and I kept screaming. And the elevator's going, It wanted to shear or crush my arm. And finally, it stalled. It just stalled. Why it would stall, I don't know, but it did. The owner came. Everyone said, hit the down button. He was smart enough to know you don't hit buttons. He dislodged the track with some tools. They pulled the cart away. I collapsed into arms, woke up in an emergency room, and my arm was there. It was just all black and blue, and I was exhausted. I think Amba had passed out. She was on a couch with a towel on her forehead, and what happened was, after they released me, they sent me to a neurologist where for weeks he would put needles in my arm with marks, and he would take readings and write down. And I said, well, what are we doing here? When is the fix? What do we do? All I could do, by the way, was this. I just had movement of my fingers, nothing else. That was it. And I'm a lefty, too. I was crushed mentally as well as physically. The neurologist had made this equally horrendous brace. It was a steel bar that came up with another steel T across it and rubber bands that held my fingers out so that my hand wouldn't atrophy while it wasn't in use. I said, okay, I get that. So when do we have whatever you got to do? He said the nerve endings were split and open to here. They had just retracted like rubber bands. One nerve ending was partially still there. That's why I could do that. That's all I could do was that. And this was very depressing. The whole idea of it was, Tatwan said, listen, you're not doing anyone any good here. Why don't you go to the retreat? And I went to the first and only Yogaville West retreat. Yogaville West was where we stayed. I had this tiny little cabin. It was a little one-room cabin, and it was hot. Water was dripping all over us. I was found by Vijay, one of my New York friends who ran Yogaville West, and said, Swamiji wants to meet you. And I said, okay, and cleaned up and put on whites and put my brace on, and I went around back of this building, and there was heaven on earth, in a sense. There was petals and incense and guava and mangoes, and there's Swamiji. I pranamed like this, and he looked at my arm and asked me. I told him the story, and he's asking about IYI. It's why the reason he had Vijay. He wanted to meet the person who's now running the institute. And while he's talking to me, he's looking at my arm and like a kid playing with the rubber bands, which didn't really make me feel good. I wasn't enjoying it with him at all. And it was also, remember, the water's dripping off us. He said, thank you. And I got up and went back up, and exhausted, I collapsed into a sleep. And after the sleep, I got up and I decided to take a shower. And I went into the shower and turned it on. And of course, I didn't have this brace on in the shower. And I slipped. And to block my fall, I threw my arms up and stopped. And what happened was my hand was working. I was fully functional. In that moment, everything worked. Everything was fine. It was still weak, so when I wasn't using it, I'd put as people who've broken an arm would know, I put the brace back on, and then I was healed. Went back to Boulder. Following week, I went to the neurologist with the brace on, and he took it off, and he did what he normally did. And I watched him and said nothing. And he was checking and looking, and he kept checking and looking and even tapping the machine. Who would do that? But seeing, what's wrong here? I said, what's wrong? He says, well, I can't find your nerve endings. And then we did what he would always do afterwards. Okay, took the brace off and says, move your fingers. And I moved my fingers. He said, okay. I said, wait, there's more. And I went like that. And he sat there and cried with me. It was a very powerful moment. And he called it a miracle. He said, that is a miracle. There's no science that I know that would do that. And there I was. And in that moment, I knew my teacher for what he was. That was a very, very powerful experience. And I guess when we think of being karma yogis, I'm not. I'm a debtor. I owe him my life. I'm going to end there, if that's okay. We'll have a little closing chant. I want to thank you all for your patience. I hope it was worth your time. And really, a brief chant and a moment of meditation, and we'll end. Asatoma satgamaya tamashoma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amrutam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.